Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 12 essential 20th century symphony cycles for non-beginners. Okay, yeah, you asked for it and you're going to get it. These are symphony cycles for people who have already gotten into the essential cycles for beginners and want to know where to go next, because I know that there are a lot of you out there. And so I hope that this is a selection of symphonies that will at least contain some music with which you're not familiar, or tell you more about the composers who wrote a couple works you may have heard, the extent to which they wrote music. It is of course, it is by no means complete, and it contains music in a variety of styles, from the very, very listenable 20th century, early 20th century romantic, still romantic school, or late romantic or neo-romantic, to absolute modernity. But, one of the things about the crazy avant-garde is that they tended not to write symphonies, because symphonies were, tried and true traditional forms. And so the real crazy people usually didn't bother with them because they wanted to create their own style using, disdaining traditional forms as much as they possibly could. And so you've got with these works a certain obeisance to tradition, a certain acknowledgement and desire to participate in the ongoing project, which is the great symphonic style, which is of course one of the it's the apex of orchestral music in our classical music tradition, and it remains the apex no matter how fabulous or interesting or curious or demented, more modern or radical things were. It's wonderful to be a part of a tradition. It's wonderful to be a part of a standard of excellence and a striving for greatness. Do all of these composers get there? Well, that's for you to decide. That's the fun part. That's why you're going to have such a grand old time. And that's why, quite frankly, I think that some of this music is better if you are a non-beginner, because you want to get your bearings first. I mean this in all seriousness. No, of course, nothing is stopping anybody from trying anything. And I encourage you to do that. I really, really do. All I'm saying is that it will be easier for you, I think, to figure out what you're listening to and whether or not you like it and how much you want to get into it if you have a sense of where these people are coming from and where the tradition has been and what the landmarks in that tradition are. But you don't have to do it that way. I mean, you could make it harder for yourself. I did. I didn't know anything. I just listened to whatever I listened to. So it's okay either way, but that's my suggestion. And that's all it is, just a suggestion. So let's get right to it. We have 12 symphony cycles, and we begin with Arnold Bax. Yes, thank you. Hello there on planet Baxia. All you Baxians, I hope you forgive me for not putting Bax in the essential for beginners list. Personally, and I don't think you'll disagree with me, Bax is a tough nut for beginners. It's kind of funny because you don't think he's supposed to be. He was a late romantic, Celtic twilight, full of yummy orchestral colors and brilliant orchestration but his symphonies, he wrote symphonic poems that are incredibly atmospheric and evocative, but his symphonies are tough. They're very serious works, and they don't have a lot of relaxation in them, and they are thematically somewhat elusive, and that's really the point. They're a riot of color and texture and that kind of stuff, but it's hard to get the tunes into your head and follow a symphonic argument in the way that you're likely to expect from your experience of other symphonies. That's not to say that it isn't there. It is. It's just that Bax very seldom repeats himself. And he always is varying his material, and he's always shifting his harmony kaleidoscopically. So you may actually be listening to something you've heard before, but you won't recognize it at all, this particular guy's, unless you know the music quite well. So I think it does Bax more justice, and I hope all you Baxians agree, more justice to put him here as more of a connoisseur's composer than as a beginner's composer. And with that, we move right on to Kurt Atterberg. Kurt Atterberg is the great symphonist from Sweden in the 20th century, and Atterberg wrote 9 symphonies, and they are beautiful. He was a dyed-in-the-wool romantic. His most famous is number 6, subtitled the Dollar Symphony, because it won a competition in like the 1920s by the Columbia Gramophone Company, Columbia Records, for a modern symphony written in the style of Schubert for some reason. And it's nothing to do with Schubert and sounds nothing like Schubert. It's a delightful, humorous, witty symphony. He had a sense of humor. Not all of his symphonies are equally great, but they're pretty fine. They really are, and very, very enjoyable. And he wrote the magic number 9. Woo! If you like romantic music with good tunes and colorful scoring and a somewhat defective sense of timing in some of them, where he goes on a bit or is a little bit, unsure of what's supposed to happen next, but it's okay. It's really okay. They're wonderful works worth discovering, and you will enjoy them if you're into that romantic style. Next, the Finnish composer Einar Englund, who really made his reputation in the second half of the 20th century. He wrote 7 symphonies. Really a wonderful, wonderful composer. His style is somewhat, well, let's say Shostakovich meets Bartók. Sort of like that. It's not Hungarian sounding at all. But what I mean is there's an element of rhythm and propulsion and snappiness to his music that's similar to Shostakovich. It's early Shostakovich particularly. But later on, he also acquired a more lyrical impulse. And I wouldn't ever call his music particularly folksy, but you get a feeling that there's a sort of a primal element to it. They're really, really powerful and fine works. Most of them are pretty short and delightful. And the first 2 are the most famous. There's a fabulous one, number 4, for strings and percussion that has a movement called Tempus Fugit. Time flies, with all kinds of clock noises in the percussion. He's really fun. He's really fun to listen to. And he knew that he sounded a bit like Shostakovich and Prokofiev and was perfectly happy about it. He really was. So Englund is somebody who's a real discovery. You'll enjoy him very, very much. Next, this is not in strict chronological order, by the way. Do not worry. Albéric Magnard, French composer who straddled the 20th century, but his symphonies, the major ones, 2, 3, and 4, I think were all written after 1900. They are wonderful works, especially 3 and 4. The 4th is one of the great French symphonies by anybody. He was a composer. He was killed during World War I, defending his farmland from German invaders. And they blew him up with his manuscripts, by the way. The 4 symphonies are the greatest cycle of French symphonies after Saint-Saëns and before Roussel. So there you go. And maybe Tournemire, but he's a very special case that we would deal with in the essential symphonies for really serious non-beginners, the non-beginners, but we're not going there. So Magnard's 4th is the one where you start, I think, or the 3rd, either one, and then you can work your way backwards. They're all in cyclical form. That is, they're in the style of the Franck Symphony in D minor, where themes recur between movements, or there's a motto theme that you hear at the beginning. That's what happens in the 4th, basically, that comes back in all of the movements. And they're just passionate, intense, post-Wagnerian romantic effusions. And they're wonderful for just that reason. You're really going to enjoy them. Next, Hungarian composer László Lajtha. Now, Lajtha was a contemporary of Bartók and Kodály, the modern Hungarian school of composers. They are excellent, excellent symphonies. There, he was of French sort of inspiration. Debussy and Ravel. He wrote glittering, beautifully scored, sensitive, very bittersweet melodic pieces with lots of percussion. They're very, very colorful. But he always put footnotes in his scores and said, just because I'm using 9 percussionists doesn't mean that the sound should ever be brutal. It should never be brutal. He wanted elegance. He wanted finesse. And he was absolutely suppressed because of his support for the 1956 Hungarian Revolution. So his music was squashed and nobody was interested outside of Hungary, particularly. And in Hungary, he was effectively banned. And he wrote 9 symphonies. I'm not sure what happened to the first. I think it was withdrawn or something. So they sort of start with number 2. And he also wrote a symphony called Le Soli for strings and percussion, which is just absolute harp, and it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. But they've been recorded by Naxos extremely well. So you've got a really good, solid Lajtha symphony cycle that you can sink your teeth into, and there are just some really, really special pieces in there I think you'll enjoy. After Lajtha, let's go to Turkey, why don't we? Ahmed Adnan Saygun, or Ahmed, however you pronounce it. I don't know what you do with the H there. Adnan Saygun, Turkey's greatest symphonist. He wrote 5 symphonies. These are really wild pieces. They began very neoclassical with, just strings and timpani and like a couple horns, just sort of in a neoclassical restrained chamber orchestra way. And then all hell broke loose and he went crazy. I'm not talking about crazy in a particularly difficult way, although his style is, could I call it atonal? I don't know. It's rhythmic, it's propulsive, it's based in Turkish folk music, but harmonically quite advanced, and he's a discovery. This guy is fun to listen to. Powerful, and he sounds like nobody else, but he's takes a little work, maybe to wrap your brain around. Really extraordinary guy. But Saygun is someone to get to know. His complete symphonies have been recorded on CPO, so you can find them, and they are quite the find, believe me. After that, Tubin, Eduard Tubin, Estonia's greatest symphonist. He wrote 11 symphonies, which is kind of remarkable. He's another composer who, as his style evolved, it began in kind of a late romantic style. I think his second symphony is called The Legendary, something like that. And then he became more and more acerbic and more sparse and not to say anemic, just acerbic. His style was always melodic, but his harmony became very astringent. That's the word. Like witch hazel, aftershave. Give it a little shot. But along the way, there are some extraordinary masterpieces. I mean, the Legendaire, which was, I think, the second or the third, one of those. The fourth, which is his Lyrica, his lyrical symphony, which is just beautiful. It's like Vaughan Williams Goes to Estonia. I mean, it's really, really pretty and hummable and with great tunes. The fifth, which is powerful and rhythmic and exciting with 2 sets of timpani pounding it out. The sixth, which is, I think, the coolest of them all. It has a central scherzo where he's, expressing his horror at jazz with a woodblock and some saxophone and things like that. It's really, really cool. Good stuff. Very, very good stuff. A symphonic cycle that's definitely worth getting to know. And there are 2 of them. One is on Bis, where the fourth is the weak link because it was a live recording and it didn't go too well. Nimi Järvi's the conductor, and all the others are marvelous. But you can get a really good performance of the fourth with on Alba, which with Estonian forces. I think the conductor is Arvo Volmer or somebody like that. Really, really, really a major symphonist, distinctive voice. And after Tubin, how about one we all know about? Ives, good old Charlie Ives. He's not a guy for beginners. There's no question about that. But his style is fascinating because he began very traditionally, but never quite. There was always something quirky about him, always. And then he slowly evolves into total crazy, atonal, mixed collage. Well, Ives, a zillion folk tunes in a zillion different keys, all played simultaneously with his fourth symphony with the wordless choir and the transcendental conclusion. And it's really, really cool. He's just a wonderful and interesting symphonist, and he's the musical equivalent, I think, of a painter like Kandinsky, who eventually, he began very traditionally, and then you start to see like lines appearing in his otherwise fairly normal-looking portraits and pictures and things until eventually the lines take over, and that's all that's left, and it becomes completely abstract. Ives is kind of like that, musically speaking. And his last symphony, this masterpiece, the fourth symphony, which has beautiful, pure tonal elements mixed with the craziest, most outrageous stuff for three conductors all going at once. There's nothing else like it. And he had a sense of humor. And his music is genuinely funny. And that is a huge bonus because you don't always get that. So after Ives, Arthur Honegger, Swiss composer who wrote 5 symphonies. Actually, he wrote more than 5. There are others. He wrote choreographic symphonies. He wrote some others. And in fact, I do all of the Honegger symphonies in my video series of fabulous concert programs that you'll never hear in an actual concert. I mention his other works in symphonic form, which did not make the number 5, like Skating Rink, one of them is called. So there's more to Honegger than just the 5 numbered symphonies, but the 5 numbered symphonies have some amazing works. They really do, especially the third, which is subtitled Liturgique, which arose out of the ruins of the Second World War. It's the mechanism of war grinding away in the finale, leading to a very uneasy, easy piece as a bird, a piccolo, twitters over the wreckage that's left, the desolation. Really fascinating. The fourth, which is called The Delights of Basel, that uses Swiss folk music. The fifth is very creepy. It's marked the 3 Ds because the only percussion is the note D at the end of each movement, played by one timpani, just quietly. Really cool stuff. His music is very contrapuntal, somewhat harmonically harsh, but powerful and really distinctive. A personal style with somebody who had something very distinctive to say. Next, back to Finland. Einojuhani Rautavaara, who passed away just a few years ago. He wrote 8 symphonies, excellent symphonies for the most part, in a wide variety of styles. I mean, his first couple were also similar a little bit to Englund and the Shostakovich sort of Russian kind of thing style, sort of. But then the third, he discovered Bruckner. And it's actually a 12-tone piece, but it doesn't sound that way at all. It has consonant harmonies throughout, and it sounds like a Bruckner symphony, only much shorter and more concise. It's really, really fascinating. The fourth is a total serial piece, 12-tone. It's subtitled like Arabescata or something. I asked him once, I said, why'd you do that? He's like, I said I wanted to prove that I could, and he did. And then after that, there's an interesting variety of things. Number 5, which is more in the style of the third, a beautiful work with a wide range of expression. Number 6 is based on material from his opera Vincent, about Vincent van Gogh. It has electronics in it and stuff. It's harsher and more spacey and dissonant. Then 7 and 8 are in his mature style. The 7th is Angel of Light, the one that really sort of made his reputation later in life. It's a beautiful, mostly serene, extraordinarily luminous piece of music, part of his Angel series of works. And then the 8th is a almost neoclassical, shorter piece in 4 movements, and really a major composer with, again, full of character, with some really distinctive style, and his symphonies really evolve. If you're interested in symphonists whose style changed rapidly and interestingly throughout their careers, Rautavaara is a great place to start. Next, Joly Braga Santos, Portugal's greatest symphonist in the 20th century, or one of them anyway. There are a couple. And he wrote 6 symphonies. And they also evolve quite dramatically from a sort of Frankian / Hindemith cyclical form type thing in the French style. He studied a bit with Vaughan Williams, and you hear that in his 3rd and 4th symphonies tremendously. They're really marvelous works, but they have their sort of modal Vaughan Williams pastoral symphony, Respighi, Respighi's Botticelli pictures and Roman tone poems kind of style. Really, really lovely works. Number 5 goes crazy. He became a atonal texture guy, and also went to Madagascar and studied primitive Madagascar folk music. And he's got 9 vibraphones going. And oh my goodness, it's just marvelous. I love the 5th Symphony. If you're going to listen to a piece that's based on texture and dense dissonant harmony, this is the piece for you. because it is so much fun to listen to. You just take each chord as it comes, each sound as it comes. Each one is special. And the finale is just insane. It's pounding, primitive, primal rhythm, sort of like the Rite of Spring goes to Madagascar. Yes, it's just incredible. And after all the craziness, this huge lyrical anguish tune pops up, and then there's a huge crash, and the final chord is a major chord out of nowhere. Ta-da! And it ends. Great. 6 is a choral work. I don't think the only recording of it that exists, it's on Naxos, is all that fabulous. In terms of the singing, it needs, I'm not sure. I don't quite get it. It's about Portugal's affair with the sea, with the ocean. It's a sea symphony in certain respects. And it has beautiful moments. But I haven't quite gotten my brain around it yet, and maybe you'll have an easier time of it. But still, he's a really, really good composer. There's some phenomenal symphonies in that pile. And last but not least, I think one of the really great 20th century composers who does not get much attention at all, and that's the Danish composer Vagn Holmboe. Holmboe wrote 13 symphonies. He was a disciple of Carl Nielsen. His style arose from that, but he lived until, couple decades ago. I mean, his 13th symphony was actually composed for the Bis symphony cycle that was in the works on the Bis label. They've done all of them. The performances are absolutely first rate. I think they're with the Aarhus Symphony under Owain Arwell Hughes or someone like that. I have to go look. I have them right over here, but they are marvelous pieces. If you like Carl Nielsen, you're really going to like Holmboe, because his style has that same propulsion, the energy, the organic sense of form. They're written in all kinds of different styles. He really knew what he was doing as a symphonist. Sometimes his music sounds a little Eastern European. His wife was I believe she was Romanian. She was a photographer, and she was got him interested in Romanian folk music, or Bulgarian folk music, that kind of stuff, a little bit bar-talky in places. But wow, what a guy to discover. His 8th symphony, the Sinfonia Boreale, I think is the nickname. I mean, some of these things have nicknames, some don't. Is really powerful. Really, really extraordinary. And so it goes. If you know that you love symphonies and you're not sure what to do next, and you want to give yourself a chance to experience some real novelty, here's the list. Go for it. I mean, there's a lot more that can be on the list, of course, but as with all these essential lists, we don't add and we don't subtract. We'll talk about the others at a future time. That I can promise you. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me, and take care.